Thank you, everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Circle, our monthly discussion on the shifts, trends, and strategies shaping the AEC and design industry, as brought to you by Upspring. For today's topic, the hybrid office is dead, the human workplace is what's next. We're joined by Susan Fernandez, the SVP of Marketing here at Upspring, and two of our panelists, who she will introduce momentarily. Just a few notes from housekeeping. Unfortunately, Rob Kirkbride did have an emergency and was unable to join us today. But I feel like Kay and Eric are certainly up to the task of filling in where needed. I also wanted to just encourage you that if there are any questions that come up, we do have the Q&A function available for you. So please feel free to send those in during the conversation. We'll save about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the discussion to answer any that come in. All right. Thank you so much. And Susan, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brittany. So, what is the future of workplace design? AI, automation, and evolving employee expectations are reshaping how work gets done and what people need from the spaces that support it. I think this is just such an important conversation right now because it's no longer just about flexibility. Firms and manufacturers who serve workplace are being challenged to design workplaces that enable focus, foster connection, support well-being, and strengthen culture. Organizations that respond with clarity and intention will lead. Those that rely on outdated workplace models risk not only falling behind both client, but also the workforce expectations. And as Brittany said, the Q&A will be live and we will reserve time at the end. I am so fortunate today to have two industry giants here with us. We have Eric Klein, who leads global workplace experience at Adobe, overseeing strategy, design, well-being, and events worldwide. With more than 20 years at Adobe, he blends sociology, as you can imagine, psychology, and design to create human-centered environments that support belonging, performance, and future-ready ways of working. Thank you for joining us, Eric. I also am really so excited to have Kay Sargent, who is a workplace strategist and director of thought leadership interiors at HOK, with over 40 years of experience shaping inclusive, research-driven environments. She's widely recognized for her work in neuro-inclusive design, change management, and helping organizations connect workplace investments to culture and business outcomes. So thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to just kick it off with talking around the idea of where workplace stands today. So what does it look like right now? Kay, if you wouldn't mind starting, I'd love to know, where are we right now? What is the state of workplace and of the market? What feels clear and what really still feels unresolved? We've had so much happen since the pandemic. And how are we approaching workplace?
Yeah, so I could talk for hours on that one topic at all, but I know we have a lot of other topics to talk on. I'll say this: we are nowhere near where we used to be, but we are still not where we're going to be. And I think we are in a period of kind of post-normal times. People kind of keep asking, well, what is the new normal? I think change is the new normal. I think there are so many things on the near horizon that are coming our way that we have to really embrace this notion that there are societal shifts, there are technology advances, there are geopolitical things that are changing right now, and that there are going to be some radical differences in the coming years, and we have to prepare for that. And so preparing to really be future ready, I think, is important. And one of the things that I think a lot of people are spending a lot more time kind of looking at the horizon to see what is coming our way. So People are still coming to the workplace. Still a lot of mix with, are we working hybrid? What is kind of that new mix? What is the reality today? But there are really things that are coming our way that are going to continue to shake up where we go in the next few years. So we're excited to talk about that today.
Awesome. So, Eric, from the corporate side, what signals are leaders paying attention to right now when deciding whether or not their workplace strategy is actually working?
Yeah, I think Kay really touched on some key areas that I can kind of double down on. So I think it's not a very simple question because it's a really complex problem that we're all trying to solve. So I think before it used to be as simple as, and I love the title of this webinar. It's not, are people coming in? That's not understanding whether or not your strategy is working. It's, are we delivering places and experiences that help the business perform better? And I think the way that people are measuring that is through outcomes, through experiences, through behavioral signals. It's not a single score. So just, are you thinking about, are people being more productive and effective? From an experience perspective, when people come in, does it feel supportive and coherent? I think to Kay's point around change, one of the best ways to utilize our spaces is to be able to use it as a structural component of the culture and being able to create experiences that help really double down on what's important to your company. What are the drivers? So are we actually able to deliver on focus spaces that work, on collaborative environments that are successful in today's world? And with all of those changes occurring at the same time, different places in the globe, different technologies, different demographics, different skill levels, different adoptions. So there's so many things that we have to plan for. And then beyond that, I think one of the most important things to us at the moment is connection. Are we driving connection that's meaningful, that's really helping with the human component that I think differentiates companies in this moment of rapid technology change? How are we connecting the humans to be able to really leverage that opportunity when they do come together? So as we're looking at how we measure it, we need to look at conditions. So like, what are the behavior patterns? And it's not as simple as attendance. There's so many things that are a component of understanding end-to-end journey maps for different types of personas, different types of team archetypes. How are people actually coming together and getting things done? And then, back to human-centered design. You need qualitative insight. You have to talk to the people. If you want to support the people, you have to understand what they want, what they need, and where they're struggling, and be able to problem solve for that. So I do think it's about evidence. That's what leaders are looking for, that we're enabling better work, stronger connection, and sustained performance.
Well, in terms of design, I love that you touched on the human-centered workplace. So, Kay, in practical terms, how do you define it in a way that leaders can actually act on?
Yeah, so I think, and I just want to double down on something that Eric said. I think the office today really is becoming a platform for what a company values, for their culture, and it is a billboard for what they stand for. It is not a place that you have to go to work anymore. That has fundamentally shifted and changed. And so when we start thinking about, human-centric design, which is, we keep kind of hearing that word batted around, I think we need to really double down on, why are we creating spaces in the first place? What is their purpose? Okay. And if it's to serve individuals and people, then we need to think about, are they doing that well? And if you think about the fact that we have some of the highest rates of burnout, depression, low engagement, we're probably not really achieving that. And so if a company's biggest asset is their people, then how are we really serving not just the organization and their needs, but how are we meeting the needs of their most valuable asset, their people? And I love the fact that everybody talks about how expensive real estate is. And it's not cheap, but 80 to 90% of a company's money is going to their people. And so if we do anything negatively to impact those individuals and their ability to function, then we actually could be costing a company more money than we're saving it. So we have to think about human-centric design. And quite frankly, we always should have been thinking about that. But why is that word so popular today? And I think that there is an underlying societal shift that we are fundamentally ignoring that we need to address. I'm just going to give you a very brutal example of that fundamental shift. I graduated 40 years ago with a degree that was paid for the day I walked out of college. I thought I would work for 30 years. I would start at the bottom. I'd work my way up the ladder. I would learn on the job. I really couldn't work in the evenings or the weekends because we didn't have computers and the internet and cell phones and all of those things. And I had the promise of being better off than my parents. A child born today has a 50% chance of living into their hundreds. And if you're going to be living longer, you are likely going to have to work longer. And I didn't retire after 30 years. I will probably end up working 50 years. And they say that a child born today might have to work 60 to 70 years if they are really going to live into their hundreds. And we know that now you can be, work can find you 24/7. It's unrelenting, and you've just been told you're going to be worse off than your parents. And the other fundamental thing is children today, people that are entering the workforce today, they're going to probably end their careers in professions that don't even exist today. That's how rapidly things are changing. And so they have to embrace living longer. How do they sustain themselves through that financially, socially, and just even, from a job standpoint? And you have to think about embracing lifelong learning. So we have to create a way that we are working today that can sustain that kind of societal shift. And I don't think we are. And so I think we need to fundamentally rethink not just what people need, but how is work going to change? And then we can start to think about the workplace. But when we talk about that human-centered workplace, we have to think about the biggest asset and what is impacting people today and what will be impacting them going forward.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to start looking at it in a completely different perspective and how we can build that today. Eric, I think that's one of the places that you really focus on, that day-to-day employee experience, particularly around connection, focus, and creativity is one that I know that you're very interested, as well as well-being. And so how does that translate?
Yeah, I think I love the way that you talked about, I'll call it well-being. Workplace used to be a place to do work. Um, it's so interesting. It's not that it's not that anymore, but I think people are looking for far different value statements and why they're coming in and what they're looking to get. And I think to Kay's point, and one of our best founders quotes, our greatest asset goes home at the end of every night. We have to keep people at the center of it. So when you talk about they're coming into these spaces that we've created or these experiences that we've designed, you want them to leave better than they came, right? You don't want them to feel drained. And so when we think about things like connection or focus or well-being, we have to design for that, but we have to do it in a way where we're constantly engaging with employees and we're constantly experimenting because things are changing so fast. So you have to start thinking, instead of I'm delivering a building, is I'm creating a living system that can adapt. And so when you think about connection, for us, it's an incredible focus at the moment. And I think it has everything to do with designing for belonging. And so Kay was talking about things like depression, loneliness. There's the loneliness epidemic. I think there's all of the things that happen, even post-pandemic, of just isolation. So when you start thinking about why people are coming in, people come in for people. We have so much data behind this. It's not just people, though, it's also for purpose. So you don't want to just come in knowing that people are there. You want to come in for the people that you collaborate with, or the people that are part of a community that you value, or people that you come in and interact with that can help you learn, or help you grow. Or maybe you're like me, and part of the reason why you come in is to be able to help other people grow because it's something that helps sustain you. So when you think about connection, it's intentional, not accidental. And I think before the pandemic and in years past, so much of our focus was how do we design these spaces and experiences to create these casual collisions? That's not the world we're in anymore. You want to create a value statement for why people come in. You want to design experiences that people feel are valuable to them. You want those experiences to be incredibly meaningful. And then when they're there, they will have those serendipitous moments that, when you think about things like neuroscience and you're bringing people together, and maybe there are people that don't know each other, the ideas that spark that happen in human form with mirrored neurons, face to face, eye to eye, shared experiences, maybe in a new environment. All of these things are things that we're infinitely reducing in our day-to-day world with some of the advent of technology. So they're even more important now. So those are the things that we're designing for. So we also need to lower the social friction. So I think having shared rituals, having food at the center of events so that it's person to person. Food is the original social networking. This amazing leader on my team always uses that quote, and I just love it. And I think there's something about the depth of connection that helps with psychological safety and trust and vulnerability and being genuine, which is one of our 4 core values. So when you start thinking about the importance of how we're leveraging our spaces to create those moments and the outcomes that are associated with them, it's not super easy to explain, but it's incredibly linear, and there's all the data is there. And then as you think about those experiences, it's not just the people that are there, it's the inclusion of new employees. It's the inclusion of people in different sites. Can you design experiences that create global connection in such a disparate time? And I think people don't want to just have to work hard. I think they want to feel when they come in that they belong there. And I think that feeling of belonging creates a whole different level of comfort that also creates the potential for people to be their best self. And so when you think about belonging, driving engagement, creativity, and retention, there's so much science behind that. But I do think human connection is really at the center of everything. Just really quickly to pop onto focus space, competing with somebody's home office and the fact that they can control everything themselves is hard. So you have to start thinking about how are you designing focus space that really works? How can it adapt to personal preference? Some people like to listen to music. Some people like complete quiet. Some people like well-lit spaces. Other people like low-lit spaces. And I think the new opportunity to design scalable frameworks that actually work, they're all about choice. They're all about adaptability. Don't think about some of the edge cases, think about the fact that you want to design a system that's as inclusive as it can be, right? So it's really creating a framework that allows for that level of agility and choice that I think makes people more successful. I think focus work looks different for different people. And I think you need different varieties of how you're able to achieve that. So people don't want to come in and only collaborate or come in and only connect. They want to be able to do focus work as well. And I think if you don't feel like you can do that when you're in the office and you're hiding time or you're battling for a focus room, I think that's creating friction that we don't need. And I think that adds to the cognitive load of employees. And I think that cognitive load is one of the things that we're constantly trying to reduce. Let's make the simple things simple. Let's make it easy to find. Let's make it work for you. So I think that's a really big area of focus for focus. Sorry for the bad wording. And I think well-being for me isn't really about being an amenity anymore, which so many people talk to. It's a performance enabler. I really think it's about reinforcing energy. It's about helping people feel like they can be more resilient and that they're more supported and that they have that level of inclusion that they need to be able to, again, work towards being their best self. And sometimes there's areas of your well-being that have such incredible ties to how you're able to show up at work. And I think the more that we can support that journey in policy and programs and spaces, the better. So it's choice and agency. How are we thinking about being flexible and adaptable? It's about normalizing sensory and neurodiverse needs. I don't think again, not to being edge cases, but really, how are you thinking about reducing cognitive and physical strain for people? Um, and then emotional well-being. So there's so much about human connection that can help with emotional well-being. And the further we get along this life of isolation, I think the harder it is to come back to the middle. And I think what a great opportunity that we have that we can use our spaces to be able to help with that. So I do think the workplace needs to help sustain energy, not drain it.
Eric, can I just tag in on this? Because there's so many there's some, I think, some misconceptions out there. And I love what you were talking about. I will say this. Not everybody's house is perfectly set up to focus. And so this notion that everybody can focus better at home, tell that to the people that are in their parents' basement, right? Tell that to the 20-year-olds that are sharing an apartment. Tell that to the people that are in a one-room, condo. Tell that to the mothers who have little kids that are running around. I mean, in many cases, those guys were the first ones asking, God, when are we opening up the office? Because we gotta do that. Well, and the people that want energy, right? So there's a lot of people that just default to say, okay, well, people that are neurodivergent, they're all hyper sensitive and they should all work from home. There's a lot of hypo sensitive individuals that thrive off of being around other people, and being in isolation is really negatively impacting them overall. And I loved one other thing you talked about. We think about belonging, right? And how important that is. So activity-based working, where people are choosing where to sit based on the activity, because 100% I'm going to agree with you. Option, choice, variety is critical. Okay. But what activity-based working sometimes gives you too many choices. And so we kind of evolved to neighborhood-based choice, where people have a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a home base. You feel grounded. You're seeing the same people. There's some familiarity. But what we've also really realized is that people aren't really choosing where to sit based on the activity. More often, they're choosing where to sit based on the environment. I want it warmer or colder. I want it busier or quieter. I want it brighter or I want it darker. And so we really have evolved and embraced this concept of environmental based working in kind of these neighborhood settings that really focus in on the needs of individuals where they can truly thrive.
I love that. And I think that's absolutely ties to the need to create environments that can be dialed, right? To your
Yes.
point. So the more adaptable those environments are, the more people they can serve in the right way. So you don't have somebody going, well, I really like this room. You're one person in a 17-person room. That's not the most efficient use of our
No.
investment. However, you're doing that because I haven't given you the space that you need that can meet what you need to be able to get this work done.
Yeah, and I think there's another mind shift and a myth that, we have to create these spaces that are highly flexible. The walls have to move, the furniture has to move, everything has to move so that people can sit there like a potted plant. The only thing that is flexible in any environment is us. Yet we want to just sit like a lug all day in one spot. And so for us, we're really embracing this notion of we're going to create a variety of settings that you get up and go to. I cannot make it so that you can sit like a perfect potted plant and the temperature is perfect for you and the next person next to you, they can totally control that. But I can create different zones that enable that. And those are occurring naturally in buildings anyway. So I think we
Really?
need to kind of reset some of our mindsets here.
Yep.
And when I think about this, we hear these, we see in the news, Google's calling people back, all these companies are calling people back. But given what you're talking about, this human-centered design, how are you, and I open this up to either one of you, how are you talking through this messaging to employees to bring them back into the office? Like, how are you talking about these spaces that are built for whatever you need? Like, how do you convey that?
So I'll kick that off and just say, I think at the end of the day, we are going to look back on this period, and apologies for being an equal opportunity offender here, but we're going to look at this as an epic failure of leadership and communication. There are really good reasons to have people come together. Right? You think about young individuals that are trying to learn, I think a lot of professions are like an apprenticeship model. Like, you don't, you don't, you don't want to hire an architect who graduated from college and then worked in their basement for the next 20 years, right? You are still learning on the job. I've been doing this for 40 years. I learn something new from my colleagues every day. And so I think being together, that osmotic learning is really, really core and essential. But what a lot of people aren't telling out loud or saying out loud, but they will say kind of behind the scenes is, yes, people can be productive working from home, but what is the quality of what is being produced? And in many cases, that has diminished because you don't have a colleague right there that you can say, hey, what about that, right? Get an instant answer. Or you're sitting on Zoom calls all day trying to multitask. And so what a lot of people have found is it's creating silos. It's diminishing the quality of what is being produced. And it's kind of eroding the ability for that transfer of knowledge and that common purpose and bond that we all need. We all need that. And so there are certain professions and certain things that you can do from home, knock yourself out. But we also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of things that aren't. And I find it fascinating that as a society, we so quickly realized that remote learning was disastrous for our children, right? It set them back from an academic standpoint and from a social standpoint. Yet we didn't equate that to young professionals who were coming into the workforce and what that did for them in a very critical stage of their development, or what it does for someone like me on the back end of my career who's saying, I need to be connected. I need to see what's coming, what these young people coming out of college are bringing to the table, and I need to learn, right? And so I think there are very good reasons. And when we clearly articulate those reasons and talk about those openly, which I don't think is happening, then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, I think, at our company, the way that we communicate, and there's a reason why I've been here almost 25 years. We treat people the way we want to be treated. So it's very honest, it's very open, and I would say there's always the why behind it. And I think we treat people with real trust because we've hired people that earn it. And I think what we do is we explain where we feel like the real benefits are. We work with teams, we work with leaders, we help them problem solve and maybe even facilitate the best way to take advantage of how our environments can help their teams perform better. And I do think it takes a certain amount of nuance. I cannot overstate that it is not a one size fits all world. It's not for anyone. We're all individuals, and I would say beyond that, teams have to work differently. And I would say with the advent of new technology, teams have to learn how to continue to work differently. And I think to Kay's point, there are certain times where when you really want rapid learning, adoption, and cohesion, those in-person moments are really critical. And I think when you have a conversation like that with true honesty and vulnerability, and you show them, real scientific evidence that this is helpful and that we can actually help empower them to be able to have those experiences be really, really positive. It's not that hard to be able to influence them and help them understand, why we think these decisions make sense. But I will also say, not everybody is the same. And I think everybody's on a different journey. So how do you try and meet, for us, 30,000 people, on their journey? And it takes It takes a lot of complex, strategic, um, really evidence to be able to help influence that and really understand the business in a way where you can enable it. A sales organization is far different than a development organization.
Mhm.
There's different cultural nuance as well. So it's all incredibly complicated, and I think it's just important to be honest.
Absolutely. I think the next thing is that we are now adding to this mix AI, automation, and how that all fits in. So, Eric, how is AI and automation changing how work actually happens? And what does that mean for the physical workspace environment?
Oh boy. Well, I will caveat that I'm not a futurist, but here's some of the things that I'm seeing. I think it's changing the shape, pace, and cognitive load of work. And I think that means that it has implications on leadership, culture, and workplace. So, just at a very high level, it's becoming more front loaded and iterative. So, I guess what I mean by that is if you're starting off your work and you're using AI to be able to early on in the process draft a workflow, explore options, synthesize information, then the blank page problem that we've all had and kind of how we put things together is gone. So, because that information retrieval is faster and there's less subject matter expertise that's needed, or less deep dives into dashboards or things like that, all of these things are incredibly accelerated. What leaders are seeing is people are arriving with more formed thinking to meetings. So, those meetings can be shorter and they could be more impactful. And meetings shift from producing content to more evaluating it, deciding, and refining. So you're shrinking these timelines, but the way that you're shrinking them is heavily dependent on human judgment, sense making, and alignment. So it's not really raw production. It's really more how are we able to quickly come together and use judgment to get to a better outcome. So I think decision quality and clarity start to pivot to be more important than speed of creation because you're getting so much of that enhanced speed through the tech. I think you also talk about individual work should be empowered, but it's also infinitely more intense from a cognitive perspective. So I was talking about how do we reduce cognitive load? And the reason why is I don't want somebody having to find a room. I don't want somebody struggling to find something that doesn't meet their daily needs from a allergy perspective or a food preference perspective in the cafe. I would much rather make all of the simple decisions simple um, and really take a hospitality mindset to as much as we can. Literally, like through color theory, biophilia, there's all kinds of environmental markers that also help reduce cortisol and help reduce cognitive load. However, all of that savings is going to go into these very quick, I need to look at this incredibly formed thought. I wasn't really brought along. It's all right here. And I need to be able to quickly connect dots and make decisions. So I think as you start to think about what that can mean just for individuals, you start to think about how spaces need to support that change. So how can we help with context switching? How can we help with, I need to make continuous judgment calls. Do we
Yeah,
have
I
the right
think you're
rooms for that? You know?
Yeah, I think you're really getting into so does it meaningfully, get integrated into workplace strategy?
Yeah.
So, Kay, can you speak to that, how you are doing that?
Yeah. So I, I'm going to say this. I think everybody in our industry right now needs to embrace foresight because we are very, very well aware of when we are designing a space, our clients are coming to us and they're asking us for our advice on things that are going to impact them for 30, 40 years. I mean, when we're building a building, it stands for 70 years. When you're negotiating a lease or building a campus, it's going to be there 30, 40 years. Even an interior space will probably be occupied at least 10 years. So when we really project out, and we do a lot of this, I will tell you that when it comes to AI, what we're seeing in the near term could be very different than what we're seeing in the long term. And we see us really kind of embracing, probably in the next 5 years, really kind of emerging more as agentic orchestration, right? Where we now are leading and leading into the guidance and the prompts of what then artificial intelligence and our artificial intelligent co-workers will then potentially be creating it. So we're going to be doing a lot more oversight. I think this is going to have some ripple effects. I think it's going to impact junior positions. And so they're already predicting that this is going to change the way that we, have universities and how we're training individuals. But when we think about the workplace itself, we see something kind of a little bit of a backlash. So, and we've seen this for the last several years. So we will also say that high tech equals high touch. The more we lean into technology, the more we as humans want to be in spaces that we can relate to. We don't want to be in these cold, sterile, metal, futuristic boxes that you see on TV. I think this is where sci-fi is getting this 100% wrong. We are seeing more people embracing personalization, stylization, authentic materials, incorporating more elements of biophilia. We want to celebrate who we are as humans. And so I think that the impact might be less rows and rows of desks where people are sitting there doing, input all day long, and we're ideating more. It should free us up to be more creative. It should eliminate some of the administrative tasks that we all hate and enable us to spend more time socializing and ideating and creating and embracing who we are as people. Whereas behind the scenes, then you've got these kind of agentic agents or partners that are running a lot of the analysis, that are running the data, and our jobs turn to guiding them and then applying what that is. So what does that actually mean when we get that data, and how do I apply that, and where can I go and leverage and use that? So that's kind of, in a sense, I think when we start looking out 5, maybe it's 10 years, what we're starting to see. When we look out beyond that, it could be a different picture, but we'll get there later when we get there. You could have a lot more robotics. You could have a lot more, we might embrace universal income. There's a lot of things that could radically change depending on how much we really lean into this. And when you think about the fact that 3.5 years ago, ChatGPT didn't exist. It was introduced in November of 2000 or 2022. And you think about how much it has changed just in 3 years, we could have a radically different scenario ahead of us in 10 years.
I love the vision that you both are painting, but when it comes to business, how do we convince, or how do we demonstrate to business leaders that building this future, that this experience that's invested in people and culture, how can we prove that it strengthens performance and business outcomes? Because they always want to know, why should I do this?
Yeah, so I think when we think at the end of the day, and I guess the question is, why should we design spaces to be more human-centric? Again, I think we probably talked a little bit about that. We talked about the fact that 90% of a company's money is going towards their people, right? And I think, quite frankly, I think that will change over time as we start to invest more in artificial intelligence, right? But I think we're going to shift to be more about productivity and more about what we actually value. And so I think there's a mindset here that we have to think about. We have an opportunity to embrace a whole new renaissance where if we lean into the arts and to the science and to the joy and really kind of taking things, if artificial intelligence and robotics can take care of some of the dirty, dangerous, or dull jobs that nobody really wants to do, it will free us up to do more things. And I look back in time where people are so worried about, jobs being eliminated. It's kind of like when we introduced the ATM. And everybody said we're going to okay, now we're not going to have any tellers. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Well, what happened is it enabled those people to shift to other roles. Now you have universal bankers where if you even go into a bank, you are greeted by someone who can help you with a variety of issues. You're not standing in a queue. You have a better experience. And so we have to really imagine, what is that better experience that we can be creating for people, and how are we leveraging the power of artificial intelligence, robotics, and technology to free us up to be able to reimagine what is really possible. And I think people that are doing that are going to understand that there are some shifts that we're going to need to make and are embracing those shifts. People that are stuck in the old way of doing things and don't ever want anything to shift, I think are going to have a rude awakening, because if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less.
And
I
I
love
think I have the fortune of working at a company that's kind of at the center of helping people understand that and actually help them through that transition. We are fully into AI, and we are trying to help empower creativity around the world. And I think, it's this real moment of being able to, I think to Kay's point, we're expanding the possibilities for people around the world. We can make this moment really, truly, amazingly impactful to the world. I mean, we can really impact the world by being able to introduce opportunities for people to enhance their ability to create, to be creative, to feed their curiosity, to put in their hands the ability to think differently about the world and how they can solve their own problems, and how they can solve problems for the world. And I think so when you say, how do I get people to understand? Luckily, it's something that we know at our core is going to be critical. And we do know that humans are the key to how technology is able to impact the world. And I think so much of how we can use our environments to be able to bring that to bear is actually incredible. It's the opportunity to connect people and allow them to hone better and better skills around, to Kay's point, how work is shifting and changing. In our industry, just to think about, a building that's going to last 100 years, the big giant milestone shifts of change that have changed the way that people think about how we need to design these environments. If people aren't typing, that's a little disruptive. You start to think about floor plans a little bit different.
Yeah.
You start to think about the need for acoustic privacy if there's talk to text and prompting, and you start to think about other types of devices and technologies that people might use and how they need to be supported. But at the center of that are humans, and they have needs. And I think understanding how things are changing and really paying attention to a lot of the studies around neuroscience and how some of those things are incredibly difficult from a neuroplasticity perspective, and how you need to be thinking about being able to support people's neuroplasticity by creating environments that help give them access to those parts of their brain through either inspirational design or thoughtful design, or design that's focused on well-being, or design that's focused on human connection. The facets are kind of there's so many that you really need to be thinking about if you're creating an environment that's going to be able to adapt and support people through these changes. And I think also through understanding how to learn and grow together, because it's a lot of anxiety, and I think teamwork makes the dream work. It's very hard to do on your own. And I think yeah, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, Eric, to your point, nowhere in nature Is there a rectangular white box? Yet we repeatedly put people in those kind of spaces and wonder why they're not thriving, right? And I think, the answer is pretty obvious when you just state it that way. But I think there's something else. There's a really fundamental question. And Susan, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but for us and for me personally, I will say there's a question that we're not asking. So many of our clients are asking us, how do we address productivity or this or that? We need to stop. And we need to ask ourselves a really fundamental question. What is it that we value? What is it that we value as a society? Because we're going through things right now, geopolitically, that I think are fundamental questions that we need to answer. We're going through that in our workplaces. If I ask my clients, what is it that you value? Do you value everybody sitting there answering emails 60% of the time? Is that really what you envision? Yeah, but you're designing your space to support that, right? And so what we need to think about is what drives value for you. Is it ideation? Is it speed to execution? Is it innovation? And then look at your spaces and tell me, are they designed to support that? And if the answer is no, because you've got rows and rows of benches where people are just, like mindlessly lost and multitasking and answering emails, then you fundamentally have a problem and a disconnect. And I think we are not asking the right questions, and we have an opportunity now to do that. Is it that you value your people? Is it you value transfer of knowledge? Is it that you value, whatever that is?
Yeah.
But we are making decisions every day that are taking us down a path that I don't think we're going to end up where we want to be.
And I
Yeah,
think it's so hard to move that needle quickly. And I just want to advocate to as many people as possible. You have to experiment. You have to find low risk opportunities where you're listening to your humans and you're trying to solve those problems, and you do it quickly and you find the data behind it to move the machine forward. We have a program that we call Lab 82 that's our experimentation engine, and in today's world you have to have a cross-functional cohort to get technology, the HR function, financially, delivery, operations wise. You got to get all together in a really dedicated team to tackle these problems quickly, get data behind them, and move them forward. Because if you aren't moving fast, you're going to get moved past.
yeah. Well, we are just about at time, and I did have one last question, but I think, Kay, you've really reframed it for me, which is what should leaders, what aren't they paying enough attention to? But it sounds like for both of you, and feel free to elaborate on this notion of setting up workplace that really feeds what the company is about. If it's about innovation, is it about excellence, really setting up the workplace to deliver that seems to be something that maybe leaders are missing the point on, and thinking more it's about flexible spaces rather than focusing on those kind of core company objectives. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, and I think we fundamentally need to rethink work. I mean, I'm just going to be brutally honest here, but we can't work the way that we are right now for 60 years. And this younger generation, that is what they are facing. And something fundamentally has to change. Whether we bake in sabbaticals for people to take breaks, I mean, we are really seriously at a point when we start doing this foresight and future casting, we're at a point where retirement might be retired. For me, it was okay, you're going to work for 30 years and then you're going to get to do all the cool stuff that, you've saved up to. If you're going to be working 60 years, that is so far out, you can't even imagine that. And so, and you can't sustain. And so what's happening is people are just quitting because they either want to deal with a life situation or they want to go travel or they want to do something. We have to rework work so that people can sustain for living longer, being healthier longer. And you can't wait until you're in your 60s, right? You have to fundamentally start in your 20s thinking about your social network, your financial network, your physical health and well-being, and how are you literally going to sustain it that. And I think companies need to embrace again this lifelong knowledge, because the history basically has been we're going to hire people with the right skill set and get rid of people when they don't have the right skill set anymore. But we don't have that endless tap of talent just waiting to be hired. We have to address and adapt to all the things that are happening now so that we can sustain.
Just to quickly add on to that, and I loved those comments, Kay. I think a critical thing for how we need to design to deal with the change and the unknown. And I think to your point around traditional models of organizational development or hiring for expertise or things like that, in a time where expertise is quickly going to be irrelevant, just because of the nature of the rapid learning, is you have to start thinking about how to design for learning. You have to start thinking about designing for adaptability, and you have to start designing for coherence. And what I mean by that is it's hard, based off of the nature of what now everyone has access to understand what is the overall filter that really helps bring people together on a singular mission of how they're going to do things. So I just think thinking about those areas of focus when you're thinking about purpose of design is really, really critical. And I think when somebody's future ready, when people are under pressure and it already feels like there's a solution. And so in my mind, that's what I'm definitely out to try and achieve.
I think this is great, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know we only have a few more minutes, and we do have quite a few questions coming in from our attendees. So I wanted to see if you guys would be open to doing a few rapid fire ones.
Sure.
So one of the questions that came through is increased and enhanced productivity the most important metric for any company when they're looking at the design of a space?
No,
Okay, well,
because
today.
I can produce something and it could be really poor quality, right? And so, I mean, look, if you value how many phone calls somebody takes, but they're pissing off all your clients, then you have to think about that. I think we need to change that to thinking about what you value and focus on that.
Yeah, and I think maybe a roll-up metric for that is in some ways engagement or things like that. It's something a little more diverse of a measure.
Okay. Do you think there's now an even greater expectation for product manufacturers to be even clearer or easier to specify from given how important all these customizable, biophilic, ergonomic, etc. expectations are? What do workplace designers really need most from their manufacturing partners today?
Products that are adaptable, that are recyclable, and that are smarter. I mean, you just let me just say this. When you buy a house, do you throw out everything that you have, gut the new house, and then rebuild it from scratch? Right? No. But that is exactly what we do in most corporate spaces. And the amount of waste is ridiculous. Our industry is so ripe for revolution and evolution that it's crazy. This, I believe, is our Kodak moment. We are doing a lot of things that are not intelligent, that are costing time, money, and having a massive negative environmental impact. And so we have to be better. So we need our manufacturers to think about circularity. We need to think about adaptability. We need to think about flexibility. And we need to make everything as easy as possible for people to be able to do that. And we got to stop just chucking everything in the trash and dumping it.
And I think maybe speaking to, so adaptive reuse is a huge part of it. Flexibility and adaptability just in general is a huge part of it. But I do think being more specific around the problems you're trying to solve when you are releasing those products. Like, talk about purpose more, talk about audience, talk about usage, talk about the situational awareness that you need to understand how this chair is actually going to help us achieve our needs.
Great. Next question is, what are your thoughts on coming back to the office when so many people have commutes of over an hour each way? We heard over and over that junior employees in particular may live far from the office because of housing costs.
So I think there's two big things that we are ignoring. I do not believe that people aren't coming to the office because our office is so horrible. I believe that people don't want to come to the office because of the commute and because of the inflexibility of the time. When we sent people home during COVID, I don't know of a single company that said, I want you to work from home. And by the way, make up your own hours. But that's what a lot of people did. A lot of people found that actually I'm really productive from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock, but usually I'm commuting or getting dressed or dropping, whatever. And this whole notion that everybody functions really, really well from 9 to 5, I've never heard anybody say that they rock it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? We were able to work in smaller chunks and take little mini breaks, et cetera. And we are still not fundamentally addressing the commute and how we actually physically work, like time blocks. And we're going to have to deal with that at some point.
And I think with the time blocks, also creating more transparency with the people that you're incentivized to come in and meet with. I mean, you're not just coming into an office to use a desk. So I do think that's the other thing that creates a value proposition that makes it worthwhile. I think if you've commuted 2 hours and you show up and nobody that you work with is there, it really disincentivizes you to come back. We need the value statement to be strong. And I think to Kay's point, as we think about a massive shift in how people work, we need to be able to think differently around how we approach things like work hours, commute hours.
And Eric, you actually said it early on. The number one amenity is people. I can design an amazing space that's got like this incredible coffee bar. If nobody's there, you don't want to be there either. It's people.
Yeah, and people vote with their feet. Like I love going to see the Louvre when I'm in Paris, but I go back to my neighborhood Italian restaurant every week. It's about the people. It's about the experience. It's not how beautifully designed it is.
Great. Another question. The current bloodbath of CRE value in US city centers, what does this say for enterprise long-term bet on workplace?
Actually, I think our city centers, the CBD needs to shift to the social business district, right? And I think what we're starting to see more and more is we're breaking down the silos from this is where you work, this is where you live, this is where you go to school, this is, et cetera. We're starting to see the emergence of more 15-minute cities, of more precincts where you can go. And I'm not just, parking, going into my building and being isolated. We're seeing blocks of areas where they're more walkable, they are sharing amenities. Access is the new ownership. Not every single building has to have a tricked out gym, right? As long as there's one in my precinct or area, and then you get this cross pollination. So I think we are seeing those silos break down and we need to reimagine what our cities really could be.
And some cities are already on the way to more mixed use development. And I think, again, they aren't our offices, but it's the same problem statement. People come in for people. So that's why you're seeing some of the CBDs needing to be re-energized, or perhaps we can re-energize, to Kay's point, some of those 15-minute cities.
Great. And I know we're almost at time, so I'm just going to ask one more question. If company values people being on the phone or answering a lot of emails, do you both support a lot of desks and little collaboration space? Because many companies leaders still feel that way, that you need to prioritize time on the phone and answering emails. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, every company has different things. If I'm a call center, if I'm an insurance company, okay, that's a really important thing. But I think we need to really start looking at how much of that is actually going to be replaced in the near future with agentic agents, right? And then is that really what you want your people tied up doing? So that's one of those kind of low-hanging fruit that I think in the next 5 or 10 years could look radically different than what we're dealing with now. But you have to think about what is important for your company and then design for that. And right now, if that is what is important for your company, then you need to consider that. But you also need to think if I can't tell you how many you know call centers we've designed where the biggest issue now is trying to buffer from listening to everybody else around you. And then the question is, well, if you're not really interacting with other people and you're just on the phone all day, why do you even need to leave your house? You can do that from home.
Yeah, we don't have that problem statement necessarily, but I agree with what Kay is saying around you need to know what your people need and you need to design for it. And I do think, in that particular use case, it's a very particular environment, but I think it's, you know, it seems as though the future trends are not showing that that's going to be as common, right? So I do think for us, it's infinitely about how are we able to help continue to be innovative? How are we able to better understand our customers' problems? How are we able to get to better decisions quickly? How are we able to constantly be learning and feeding that curiosity that helps us, try and change the world? So that's where our focus is.
Well, thank you so much for that. I know we didn't get to all of the questions that came through today, but I hope you all found this conversation incredibly valuable. I know I certainly did. Thank you again so much for joining. As a reminder, we will be sending the recording of today's session out via email this afternoon, so be on a lookout for that. And we encourage you to share it with members of your team who might find this conversation particularly valuable. All of our previous discussions are also still available on demand through our gallery. And we hope that we'll see some of you on March 25th, which is our next The Circle, which is Leading Out Loud, Women Rewriting the Rules of Power in Design for Women's History Month. Registrations for that will open shortly. But thank you so much. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Eric. And thank you to our wonderful moderator, Susan, today.
Thanks for hosting the conversation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.